So this is the first in a series of videos where I am going to take you through how to make a newborn beanie, just like this one, from start to finish. But there's a catch. This is for left-handed knitters, not for right-handed knitters. I found when I was trying to learn how to do some things while being left-handed, it's pretty hard to learn something new in knitting when you're left-handed. So I'm going to teach you how to do some of this stuff for lefties so that we don't get left out. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is gauge. Gauge is how many stitches are in 1 inch. So here you're going to take your tape measure and you're going to put it on there. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4 stitches to the inch. That's a pretty standard size for what we're going to do with the yarn we're going to use and the needles that we're going to use. That's a pretty standard size. A lot of people will find that that's kind of the numbers that they get. So the materials that you're going to need. Now the way you're going to figure out gauges, we'll walk through that, but you need to know the materials before we do that. So what you're going to need are a set of double pointed needles. We are going to work in the round. In the round is you're going to knit around and around and around and around, and pretty much without stopping. You're just going to go around and around and around until you get to the point where it measures the length you need. Working flat is working back and forth. For a hat, especially for a newborn, you don't want to work back and forth because a lot of babies, especially newborn babies, have very sensitive heads. So a seam on a hat can irritate their sensitive head, their sensitive skin and their sensitive head, and can give them rashes or even it can blister or give them an open wound. So you really don't want to put a seam on a hat for a newborn. If you can avoid it, go for it. So these are double pointing needles. They have a point on both sides. The size we're going to need are size 8 or 5 millimeter. These are bamboo. They also come in metal. If you're looking to start out cheaply, metal is the way to go. Just because it's cheap doesn't mean it's cheap material. You can find size 8 needles in anywhere that sells yarn. It's a very standard size, as is the yarn that we're going to be using. I'm using a worsted weight yarn. Now, the weight of the yarn is not how much it weighs when you pick it up. It's how thick it is. And the way you figure out if you're using worsted weight yarn is on your label. Somewhere on your label, you're going to look around and there'll be a little picture of a skein of yarn. In that picture of a skein of yarn will be a number on that skein of yarn. And it's going to be size 4 for worsted weight. Worsted weight is very popular in the United States. Excuse me. Any place that sells yarn in the U.S. will have worsted weight. It's that popular in the U.S. So, the first thing we're going to learn is how to cast on. Casting on, what the heck is that? Well, casting on is how you're going to get the yarn onto your needle so that you can actually knit. That's how we're going to put stitches on the needle. Now, we talked about gauge. Now, I don't have a written pattern for this hat, but it's simple, standard newborn hat. I make these a lot, so I know what it is off the top of my head, so I don't really need a pattern. But I'm going to talk you through the pattern as I go. So what we're going to do is, this video is talking about casting on. The next video we're going to learn how to knit and purl. This is working in a ribbing. When you have knit and purl, this is a ribbed edge. This is worked in stocking knit stitch. That's just knitting all the time. And then we're going to learn how to decrease the top so that it doesn't bunch on top. We don't want it to bunch on top. It just doesn't look as nice. So this video is about casting on and putting the stitches on your needle. Now, we talked about gauge. There are 4 stitches in an inch. A newborn baby's head is approximately, on average, not every baby, but on average, they are 13 inches around. Some are 12, some are 14. It varies, but the average is about 13 inches around. Now the way you're going to figure out how many stitches to put on your needles is, now I know there are 4 stitches to the inch. We measured that before. 4 stitches to the inch. So we're going to multiply 4 times 13, which is how big around the baby's head is. So that gives us 52 stitches. So we are going to cast on 52 stitches onto our needles. I'm going to start with just one. Now when you get your double pointed needles, they come in a pack of 5. For a hat, you only need 4. The 5th one, put it away, keep it, because there are projects that you will need that 5th one. But for hats, you only need 4. So we're going to start by making a slip knot. The way you make a slip knot, leaving a couple inches, I don't know, about 6 to 8 inches, to weave in the end at the end. Weaving in ends is so that we can't see where the beginning or where the end is. On this edge, you can't really tell where the beginning or the end is because I took this piece and I kind of wove it in there real good. So you probably can't even tell on the inside where I did it. Unless you know exactly what you're looking for, it's hard to find it. So even though I've been knitting for 20 years, sometimes it's hard for me to find it. It's actually right here, but I hid it pretty well. So we're going to make a slip knot. The way you make a slip knot is you're going to pull these ends in like that. You're going to make a pretzel with your yarn. Just like when you go to the mall and you get Naughty Annie's pretzel, that's what they look like. Well, you're going to do that with your yarn. And then you're going to take this right here, this loop here, and you're going to pull it through. Pull it tight. So this loop right here, you're going to put that on your needle. Just like that. And you're going to pull it tight. Don't pull it too tight. You want to make it so that knot is right up against the needle. But it needs to be loose enough that it moves freely on your needle. If it's too tight, when you go to knit that stitch in the next round, you're not going to be able to get that second needle in there. So you need to make sure it's tight enough that it's right up against the needle, but not so tight that it's not going to move. It needs to move very, very easily. So I like to hold this piece in my underneath. You can kind of let it hang freely. It doesn't really matter. I just like to hold it. Keeps a little bit more taut for me. So now we're going to make the backward loop, or the backward loop. You're going to take it on your fingers and wrap it around. You're making a loop. You're making a backwards loop, which is where it gets its name from. So now you're going to put this through here. You notice how that looks like a cursive E. That's also where it gets the E cast on nickname. And you're just going to pull that tight. Again, don't pull it so tightly that it doesn't move freely. It needs to move freely or it's just not going to work. So we're going to do this a whole bunch of times. 52 times, just like we talked about, right? So I've got 4, 5, 6, 7. You want to try and keep them as evenly taut as possible. This is your tension. How tight the stitches are on your needle is tension. You want it to be as even as possible. You don't want it to be loose this stitch and then, tight for a couple stitches and then, because that little wonky bit will be on your hat and you really don't want to see that. So if you find that you've got a couple stitches that are looser and they look kind of bumpy and yucky, take them off and restart your counting from where you took them off. So we've got 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26. So they're halfway there now. 27, 28, 29, 30. 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52. Okay, so we've got enough stitches for our hat. So now I'm going to show you how to join in the round. Join in the round. So we're going to split the stitches fairly evenly. It does not have to be exact at all. Just fairly evenly onto your needles. That looks close enough to me. All right, you want to make sure that your yarn you want to make sure it's not spun. You want them, when you go to join in the round, you want all the stitches to be facing the same direction. You don't want them to be like this. Twisted, you don't want that. That would be very, very bad. So be sure that they are not like that, or you are going to have a twisted hat and it will not be a hat. So I like to just check real quick and make sure that all my stitches, like this part right here, the ridge right here, I want them all on the inside. Because that way I know that none of them are twisted. So now we're going to join in the round. Now make sure the yarn coming from your skein is not like this. Okay? If it's like this, then you want it to be on this side, because we're going to knit the first stitch. So we want it to be coming out the back and not in between your needles at all, because then your yarn will be, you'll be pulling your yarn up from in between your needles, and that would just, you can do it, but it's not easy. So you really want to avoid that. So you want it free and available. So here we go. We're going to join in the round. I'm going to slide this stitch right here off onto this needle. And I'm going to take this first stitch over. So the last stitch from this needle becomes the first stitch on this one. And the first stitch on this one becomes the last stitch here. And what this does is makes it so that it's very even all the way around. You're not going to be able to see where the hat starts and stops when you do it like this. It will just automatically. I'll show that to you again. I'm going to take it off the needle. And I'm going to show it to you again just so you can see it a little bit better. Okay, so this is the first stitch and this is the last stitch of the round. When we're working in the round, they're not called rows, they're called rounds, because we're working in a round shape. So the first stitch of the round is here, and this is the last stitch. So you're going to take the last stitch, put it on the needle in front of your first stitch, and you're going to pull that first stitch over that last one and off onto the third needle. So now your hat has been cast on and joined in the round. And if you look, all your stitches are on the inside. None of them are twisted, and they're all just where they're supposed to be. So this is step one. We have our hat cast on with the appropriate number of stitches, and we are ready to start the ribbing, which is the knit to purl to for this pattern. So in the next video, we'll talk about the knit and the purl stitch. So your hat is now cast on and ready to go. I'll see you next time to learn how to make the ribbing of your hat.